the YouTube.
And we should be live on YouTube now. Yeah.
Okay, great. So next I want to talk about this video game environment that we constructed to test some of the predictions from the computational model. So in this game, four people need to find coins that are hidden underground with their metal detector. So people come to the lab, they sit on different computers, and then they are networked in this virtual environment. And the game looks like this. So here we're walking around like independently, searching for coins. Then, for example, we see this other person in the back making this digging animation. So that means that they're successful. We're approaching them, but now we're lucky enough to find our own resource patch, and we are clicking on those coins to extract them. So it's very similar to the simulation framework, right, where we have these circular patches. Individuals can either explore independently, or they can observe others and then join successful discoverers. So in the experiment, we had a simple 2x2 design. So first we varied the environment. So as in the simulations, the same number of coins could either be concentrated in few but rich patches, or it could be distributed among many but poorer patches. And then we also varied the incentive structure. So we either incentivized them on the collective level and paid them depending on how many the group as a whole collected, or we paid them on an individual level, depending on how many coins each of them collected individually. So first, I want to talk about some basic behavioral results. First of all, we found that in concentrated environments, the joining rates were much higher. So you can also see the different ranges here on the x-axis. So people were much more likely to join others if they observed them being successful in the concentrated than in the distributed ones. And interestingly, and also in line with the simulations, in concentrated environments, social information use was actually adaptive for individuals, but it was maladaptive for individuals in the distributed environments. And then what was really interesting was that we observed this stark contrast between individual success and collective success in concentrated environments. So in these environments, it paid for individuals to use a lot of social information and to join others, but it was maladaptive on the collective level, right? So you can see on this plot on the right that the average number of coins collected declined very rapidly the more people on average exploited a given patch. So and then as we placed incentives on the group level, this actually reduced the joining and thereby increased performance. So there was this trade-off between individual and collective success. And if we incentivize them, if we pay them on the group level, this led to less social information use, which was maladaptive for the group level, and by that increased group performance. So these were just some behavioral results, but of course the data are much richer than that. So these are some example trajectories from people, and you can really see it's like a signature. So there were so many different strategies people followed, and we wanted to, extract information from these trajectories. And to do that, I developed a hidden Markov model that was trying to identify decisions in those messy trajectories and then also explain why those transition occurred, right? So in the plot here, you can, for example, see at those points that something changed in the movement patterns. So before, they were more or less randomly exploring the environment, and then at some point, they decided, okay, now I want to join this other person who discovered a patch. And then to do that, we use this hidden Markov model, as I said, where we have two hidden states. So either individual exploration or what we call social relocation. So individual exploration is characterized by by larger turning angles, so you're turning around a lot, by more like random changes in distance, and also larger relative bearings. Versus in the social relocation state, you have more directed movement, smaller turning angles, you have a greater reduction in distance, and you have very small like relative bearings because you're directly focusing towards someone else. And what this model then does is that it probabilistically assigns individuals to one of these two different states at each point in time, and then it also infers the transition probabilities between the different states, right? And lets us use different individual or social factors to predict those transition probabilities. So we took information from each individual's visual field at each point in time. So for example, could they observe someone else? How far is the patch away that they can observe? And how many people are already exploiting at this patch? And then we use those factors to predict their probability to switch from individual exploration to social relocation. And so what's really neat about this model is that we simultaneously infer the states, right? And we do that with a full uncertainty. And then we can use information about their sampling process of the environment, what they could see, to predict the changes between the different states. So yeah, so this is what I showed in the beginning, right? So first we infer a decision from noisy behavioral indicators, and then we use information about people in this environment to explain those decisions. And then what's cool, we can of course use the simulation data to validate this approach, which is what we did. But let me come to the actual result. So first, this just shows the average probability to switch to social relocation for all cases when you have observed someone else being successful in your visual field. And we can clearly see that in both incentive conditions, people were more likely to switch to social information use in concentrated environments, which also makes sense, right? Because the patches, they will stay longer, they provide more traction for social information use. And as in the behavioral results, we also observed this nice contrast between individual and collective success. So so this model was fit in a hierarchical Bayesian way. So we have individual level weights for each individual. Of course, yeah, that was very, and then we see that the more likely people were to respond to social information increased on average the numbers of coins they collected, but on a collective level, it decreased the collective performance. And again, as in the behavioral results, putting incentives at the group level reduced their propensities to switch to social information in the concentrated environments. And then in the paper, we also look at like a lot of different things. So now I just talked about, the average probabilities, but we also look at the different influences of like the visual patch distance, the number of visible exploiting players, and then also the time since your own personal success. And just to make this like very short, like what we find is that with group incentives, we really have this increased selectivity over time. So you can see this in the top, in the middle two plots on the top. So where we have this like decline in the weights, which shows that like in the beginning, they were still using social information rather indiscriminately. So they were still responding to a lot of different things. And then over time, they became more and more selective and only responded to social information if the visible patch was close and if only few players are already exploiting at this patch. So it seems that group incentives, they both make people less responsive to social information in general, but it also makes them more strategic and more selective in how they incorporate social information. And that seems to benefit groups over time. And then we also looked more into like the spatial temporal dynamics. So here you can actually see the data from the worst of our groups. So here everyone is just traveling together all the time. So you can already tell that this is quite inefficient in exploring the environment, and they're exploiting like each patch together. Here they just missed one that was very unlucky. Yeah, to analyze this, we were using a time-lagged regression. So we were predicting collective success at time point 0 based on the inter-individual distance at different time lags in the past. And what we found is that in distributed environments, it was indeed always better to stay away from each other. So in distributed environments, it was always in the collective interest to disperse a lot and explore independently. And in the concentrated environments, there was this nice trade-off between exploration and exploitation. So at short time scales, it was actually better to be close together because that allowed them to very efficiently exploit resources that they found, but then over longer time scales, it was better to disperse again, right? So you should really have this like fission fusion kind of dynamic where people come together once they were successful, but then they also spread out again to discover more resources. Yeah, so I also wanted to talk about a different immersive reality experiment, but I guess because of the problems we had, I might skip that. Um, what do you think? So we have more discussion time in the end.
Yeah, like I would say if you can like short this part a little bit so we can discuss a little bit.
Mhm.
And if we have more time later, you can always come back to present a little bit of this as well if you want to.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so I think I will just very briefly mention this because it's also like pretty cool work together with Charlie Wu from the University of Tübingen, where we created this Minecraft environment, where also 4 people were incentivized, to pay rewards, to find rewards, and they needed to destroy those blocks, and some of them contained rewards and others not. And here we're unsuccessful for a while. Then we can also see this other player there, and there was this blue splash, so they were successful now. So we're following them, and now we're finally successful as well. Um, and in this experiment, which was also had a very like simple design, so people could either be in this environment on their own or in different or in groups of 4. And we varied also the reward environment again. So we either had like random environments where there was no spatial autocorrelation in rewards whatsoever, or we had those smooth environments where there was like some spatial autocorrelation. And of course, only in smooth environments, social information use makes sense, right? Because in random environments, if you're close to others, you're just competing with them, but there is no useful information in their behavior. But in smooth environments, you have both local competition for resources, but also like the value of their behavior in finding in finding resources. So we'll skip those results. Yeah, so we did I think I will also skip that. So we used this like really nice approach from Ariana Strandberg-Peshkin's paper on baboon leader-follower dynamics to identify those pull events where someone moved and then someone else followed them to get like a direct behavioral estimate of like social influence events and leader-follower dynamics. Um, so in this case, you have this min max min sequence, so we were looking for sequences in the data where pairs of intervals were close together, then they were farther away, and then they were close together again. And then we looked at which individual moved more in this time period. And that would be like the follower, and the one who moved left would be the leader. And what we found there is that in smooth environments, there were much more of these pull events. So someone found something, and then you were pulled towards them because you were expecting to find rewards there as well. Interestingly, we didn't find any difference of overall leadership. So how often you were a leader versus how often you were a follower on average rewards. But during those pull events, leaders, of course, collected collected more rewards than the followers. So essentially, only during those pull events there was the selective use of social information, but it was not that people could track overall better individuals. But what I want to talk about in a bit more detail is the computational framework that we developed here. So, so essentially, we want to sequentially predict each block that people destroyed, right? So we want to know which block are they destroying next, and to do that, we define different features. So we had both asocial features, which is just like the proximity, how close is a block to me, then the visibility, can I see it? Then we used a Gaussian process function for reward generalization to model like the behavior that people might expect to find rewards close by when they were already successful, right? So they generalized based on their personal experience. Then we also use like social features, like how close is a block to a successful other. So you've observed someone being successful, how far a block to them, and then proximity to unsuccessful others. Then we throw all these features into a softmax function and try to infer the weight that people put on the different features, right? To understand like yeah, which features of their individual and person and social environment drives the decision making. So here are just some basic results from a model comparison, and we essentially find that in the solo conditions, people used something called area restricted search. So we didn't only have these like static models where feature weights were constant over time, but we also had more dynamic models where feature weights could change depending on how successful you were yourself and how successful you observed others to be. And so in area restricted search, your search became more local if you were recently successful, right? So this makes sense, like that you have two different modes of searching essentially. If you haven't been successful in a while, you make long range displacements to find, a good like area. But if you are successful, then you're foraging more locally. And this was this best explained behavior in the solo conditions, and in the group conditions. We had a model that combined this individual area restricted search with a conditional social learning model where people relied more on social information use, relied more on social information when they haven't been successful in a while. So it's also called a copy if uncertain in the social learning literature. So you use social information only if you haven't been successful. And so we essentially found through this model that individual success is driving adaptivity of both individual search behavior, but also social information use. So individual success determines how closely in your environment you forage, but it also determines how strongly you rely on social information. And then, of course, we have weights for all these estimates, but yeah, I will skip that for now. Because instead, I want to move from this virtual environment into a very different one. And I'm just right in this environment, so I really want to talk about this. So I've over the last 2 years, together mostly with Alex Rakowski, a PhD student, and Ralph Kurvers, we conducted 10 different ice fishing competitions in North Karelia in Finland, so around the Joensuu area. And so in this area, ice fishing is a very common hobby for people, but there are also these competitions that have been going on for many, many decades. We actually also have longitudinal data on these competitions that we want to analyze at some point. But we went to Finland and we organized 10 of those competitions. And here is some drone footage. So each of these black dots is a person, and you can already imagine the vast scales of this problem. And people were also incentivized to catch as much fish as possible. So very similar to the experimental work. And they could also, just like search the landscape independently, try to find good patches, but they could also approach others and use social information. but of course they're also trying to hide when they were successful sometimes. So they're very interesting social dynamics going on there. And to get good data on their individual level informational environment and on their decisions, we equipped each of them with a GPS tracker, but also with a head camera. So we knew exactly what they were doing at each point in time. So here they're drilling a hole. And then they're sitting down and extracting fish. Yeah, so based on this video data, we could really code what they were doing, right? So we knew when they were moving, we knew when they were drilling, and we knew each individual fish catch they made. So it's really unusual for like human foraging studies in the wild, right? That you have this high level, individual level data, and also in like a collective foraging context. And so to analyze this data, and by we, I mean mostly Alex, who did all the actual work, and I just did the supervising, so I will keep his face on all of those slides. We try to predict the angling choices in both space and time. So here, for example, you can see 4 angling choices. This individual went from spot 1 to 2, 3, 4, and then our aim is to understand where will they drill the next hole. And so for this, I actually adapted the modeling framework we developed for this Minecraft environment. That's why I also explained this in quite some detail. So just to briefly recap, we try to understand the drivers of individuals' behavior by defining different target locations, so defining options that they could destroy, and then we have a feature value for each of these options, and then we use Bayesian inference to tell how much they rely on each of these features. But so in this case, we know, okay, this individual went from spot 4 to spot 5, but unfortunately, there are no obvious Minecraft blocks in this environment, right? So we don't really know where this person could have gone. And so to define this option space, we simulate 300 alternative locations from each individual's movement distributions. So we took each individual's turning angle distribution and step length distribution, and from that we simulated alternative spots. For each spot, we looked at the different values of different features, and then we used those features to predict which of the spots they would actually choose. So here is an illustration of that. So the last spot choice was the green dot in the middle, and we want to understand where they move next. And so first, we have a success feature that generalizes based on their own personal success. This is very similar to this GP prediction in the Minecraft experiment. So the last successful spot was this star-shaped thing in the bottom. And so the simulated spots that are close to that have a higher feature value. Then we also look at a social feature. So this is the distance to other players. So these gray squares are the other players, and dark feature values mean that it's a low distance to other players. Then we also looked at features of the environment, and we know that ice fishers, they pay a lot of attention to these like depth curves, because that means something for the fish behavior that I don't really understand. But they tell us that that's what they're paying attention to, and they want to be close to these depth curves. And then again, as in the Minecraft experiment, we combined all these different features through a softmax function, and then try to predict their actual choice, based on weighing of these different features. And so this X is where they actually where they went next. And what we find there, so each of this dot is for one of the 10 different lakes, and the gray shaded area is the fixed effect across all lakes. And so we find that consistently across all lakes, people used all 3 features. So they were more likely to drill a hole close to other players, close to where they expected to be successful, and close to the depth curves. So the effect sizes were smallest actually for the roughness features, so for these depth curves. So they seem to mostly rely on their personal information. So yeah, so search where you were successful before, and on social information, so where others were successful. And then again, as in the Minecraft environment, we also have these adaptive social features. So so the weight of social information was not constant over time, but it could change depending on your own conditions. And so in this case, we made both the social feature, but also this roughness feature interact with the success feature. So it essentially means that if you rely more on social information again and more on this ecological roughness information if you haven't been successful in quite a while. And indeed, we also find this, that people adjust their social information use to their own personal success. So they really seem to prioritize their direct personal information from the environment, but they seem to rely more on social information if this personal information is lacking. And then lastly, we also looked at the actual utility of those cues, like whether it was actually adaptive. So we just predicted whether they would find something, like whether they would catch a fish at a given patch, depending on the feature values. And so there is a bit more heterogeneity across the different lakes. But at least the success feature seems to be very predictive of discoveries in the future. So that also shows that there is actual spatial autocorrelation in the data, which then also provides traction for social information use, right? And people and social information use also seem to be a predictive of success in most of the lakes, but not in all of them. And this roughness feature is a bit more mixed. And now we're also trying to understand, of course, a bit better, why, which features of the lakes determine, what's predictive, and then maybe whether that also predicts how people use different sources of information. Yeah, so here are some results of a model comparison again, where we find that this a selective model that combines all the features and also has this adaptive tuning of weights, has the best out of sample predictiveness. And then what's really cool, but we're working on this right now, so this will not be the final results, but I still want to show you. So based on this fitted parameter estimates, we can then simulate new movement trajectories and see how closely they match the actual data. And compared to, for example, a random walk. So in green, you can always see just a random walker. In black, we have the real data, and in red, we have the simulated data based on the fitted parameter values. And yeah, and for example, we find this nice relationship that as the time since the last patch discovery increases, they relocate faster in distance. So this area restricted search, and this seems to be recovered quite well by the model, except for really long times. But we think we know what's going on there, so I think we will achieve an even closer fit there. And then the same with the turning angles, that if you haven't been successful for one or two spots, then you turn around quite a lot. And if you haven't been successful in quite a while, then you really just go to a total different area and you don't turn a lot. And also the feature values actually mirror the the real data quite well. The social feature seems to be a bit overestimated, but again, yeah, this is still work in progress. So yeah, so let's see what will come out of that. Yeah. So with that, I want to wrap it all up. So we went from simulation to immersive reality experiments to then decision making in the real world, and so and through that, I think we've developed a lot of different tools and methods how we can really study cognitive processes and decision making in much more unconstrained collectives. And with that, we really hope that in the future we can push an approach of studying like cognition in the wild and make, studying psychology and like cognitive science a bit less like lab-based, but bring it more into like real ecologies and real decision environments. And yeah, and so the idea is that we can get like high resolution data by tracking people's internal state, their information acquisition, their spatial positioning, and also like the choice environment, what they could have done, like in the real world environment, and then we can apply those computational models that first infer decisions from these like multidimensional data sets, and then we can use like psychological process models to actually infer how people weigh different cues and how they make decisions in this environment. Yeah, and with that, I would like to thank you again very much, and and I'm open for a question for at least like half an hour. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dominik. This was such an interesting talk. I'm gonna remember everyone that to ask anything, you may type a question mark in the chat. That I hope is working now. So you type a question mark, and if you're a student, please also type an S, so you have priority to ask anything to Dominik. And when you ask your questions, please present yourself a little bit, at least with your name and like which country you are or your institution, so we can like start getting each other a little bit better. Thank you very much, Dominik. You may want to like stop sharing your screen.
Yes.
Okay. Is the chat available for anyone? Jonathan and David? Yes, here you go. Okay.
Hi, I'm David. I am a fifth year graduate student at Yale, working with Eduardo Fernandez Duque. I think this model is super cool, and I guess you're more into like the intelligence stuff than like behavioral ecology, because the whole time that you were talking about this model, I kept thinking about like also vigilance. It's really neat that you're taking into account that animals only have like a certain amount of ability to take in information about their environment, but that also puts them at a lot of risk. And another reason why they would want to hang out with their conspecifics is for watching their back. And I wonder if they could also make, well, those would be important foraging decisions to make, where there might be more food over here, but I want to face this way because they'll watch if a predator is coming over there and maybe there's still something over here that then I can block. There could be a lot of interactions there, I'm thinking.
Yeah, so absolutely. Yeah, so
yeah.
we haven't looked at like predation at all, right? But this is like such a big driver of like sociality, of course, across a lot of different animals. So I think this is really due to the fact that, it's really focused on humans. Like, but yeah, but I'm super interested in like behavioral ecology questions in general. Um, and I think for like a lot of different animals that like plays a huge role, also for humans actually, right? Like in like hunter-gatherer societies, that there's a huge threat not only through predation but also through, like big mammals like elephants, for example. So I'm actually working on similar questions with Brian Wood from UCLA, who's working with the Hadza in Tanzania. And so we're trying to do something similar there. And in this environment, people are really afraid of elephants, for example. And so they try to, use social information and explore the environment, but they also try to be, to stay away from elephants as much as possible. So yeah, so it's also an issue for humans, of course.
Thanks.
Christoph? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was an amazing talk. Thanks a lot, Dominik. So I am Christoph. I come from the University of Constance, and I am a postdoc, and I work on social influences when humans eat together at also the cluster of collective behavior in Constance. I had a question concerning the simulations at the beginning. Did not fully understand if the populations of agents, they were homogeneous in their rules, in their underlying rules, or if there were having different rules, each of them, and or if you only presented the results with the homogeneous case, or if you also had results when you make individuals having different rules, and how this would affect the results. Thanks.
Yeah, very good question. So in the first paper, we really only look at homogeneous groups and focus on the collective outcomes. But we've also explored some models with heterogeneous groups and then apply, evolutionary algorithms to see which sort of like social information parameters and other like cognitive parameters would evolve in different environments. But that's the next step essentially, like introducing, maybe also changing environments, and then having evolving learning parameters, and then like heterogeneous groups. But for now, we only have like homogeneous groups. Yeah, and then we just observe the collective outcome essentially.
Really great. Okay, thanks a lot.
And you said you're working on social information using eating decisions. That sounds very
Yeah,
interesting.
but it's a much smaller scale. It's when the humans are on at the same table, and what are the social influences. So it's like groups of 3, 4 individuals, and whether they know each other, they don't know each other, and basically also when they have to share, for example, a common bowl of nachos, what are the rules and stuff like that. How this is, do they know each other? Is it influencing how they would behave and stuff like that? So it's more, much more like, it's also with the social norms, for example, more about how can you eat or not. Maybe there is less social norm aspects in the work you have with fishermen, or maybe it's also not so good to follow someone for so long. Maybe it will not be appreciated by someone to be followed. Maybe, I don't know if you look into that as well. Or do you ask also them some psychological question, for example, how did they
Yeah, so
feel
we
with
have
this person?
so we have some questionnaires with some psychology traits, just some basic, like how cooperative, competitive, how much do they enjoy different things. So we have that, and we also conducted some interviews with them, and it's indeed like it's very tricky. So they all say, that like they don't really want to use social information, they don't really want to scrounge, but then of course they say they still do. So I think there are some interesting norms around this as well. But I think in our setting, it's quite clear that, it's like an experiment and they're allowed to do this. And so, yeah, I think it should be relatively, but it's a very interesting dynamic. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
I was actually thinking for a while about like doing some experiments or some projects on mostly like vegetarian like eating decisions of like how people alter the norms surrounding that, and like maybe also use some of those techniques about, like what did they see and what's happening, maybe in a like buffet context or something like that. So I was always dreaming about that, but I've never really done it. So maybe I will drop you an email. Let's see.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Juan Diego Figueroa.
Yes, yes. Well, hello, I'm Juan Diego Figueroa from University of Rosario in Colombia, Bogota. And Dominic, I wanted to ask you, you talked about Minecraft for using it for a simulation, right? Was it with real players?
Yeah.
Okay. So, like Minecraft being a game that can be programmed, by yourself, doing experiments, like could this platform be used for more experiments, like social experiments, under more like free environment that you talked about, kind of like the fisherman one, but in Minecraft, kind of like that. Like, could it be used for that, or is it a lot more controlled?
Yeah, I mean, there's really like the sky's the limit, right? You can do so much in Minecraft. I mean, so these other experiments that was done in Unity, and we switched to Unity essentially because there is much more flexibility in what you can do because you don't have this block structure. So because we wanted to have these patches, right, so that are round and then you can find them, and with Minecraft that would have been a bit more difficult. But I think in principle there is a lot you can do with Minecraft, and it's really cool, and people also really liked it. The participants, they really liked it. They saw this Minecraft and they found it really cool. So yeah, I think there's a lot of potential actually.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because like I was thinking, yeah, for like this kind of social experiments, it could be a lot easier like to use Minecraft because I mean the scale that you described for the experiment in Finland was just like too vast with the lakes and the cameras and the drone footage. So I mean I think that if used correctly, like exploring it a lot more because I think it's still very primitive. We are not using video games because it's well kind of difficult to think about for experiments. Yeah, but I think that like for the scale that we have, that could be like so much more easy to control and a lot cheaper for study. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, I think those video games, they really provide a nice middle ground between usual psychology experiments and like real world decision making, right? So it's already, I mean, they also have drawbacks. I mean, it's also in those experiments, it's just super complex, right? Everything's interacting with everything else, and especially in like in a collective context. And so it provides a lot, much less like direct insights compared to usual psychology experiments. But of course, the real world is even more complex, right? So I think like it's a really nice, like, yeah, I think it's a really nice middle ground that can then also help you to develop new tools and methods that can then also be applied to study decision making in the real world, like in the ice fishing. And this is also what I experienced in these different projects, right? That there was a lot of like a cross fertilization, that we learned something in like one system, and then we applied it in another system, then we modified it again for the other system. And so yeah, so I wouldn't say, only do video game experiments or only do this or that, but I think it's really this continuum that allows you, yeah, to bridge between simple lab experiments and real world decision making.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions?